So this is boxing for PlayStation, and I want you to take a good look at that cover art and also this title screen. Engrave that image to your mind, and then take a look at what's actually in the game. Yep. The visual disparity aside, Boxing, a 2001 release courtesy of D3 Publishing, A1 Games, and Nekogumi, I guess, is a somewhat competently executed yet fairly simplistic boxing game for the PlayStation 1. Originally released as a budget title that you could get for $10, Boxing, or All-Star Boxing, or The Boxing, features a roster of 13 boxers in stubby, chibified form, with only 3 of them available from the start. To unlock the others, you have to play the Scout mode, pick an opponent, defeat said opponent, and they'll be added to the roster of playable boxers. In addition to Scout mode, there's also the Ranking mode, where you pick a fighter and earn points by winning matches to qualify in divisions and championships beyond the local stock. And there's also a versus mode for singles matches between 2 players or a computer opponent. There's also a records mode to keep track of records, and a notes section which gives you some tips on how to use the individual fighters. Of course, with all this information, you'll be needing a memory card to retain this stuff, and support for such cards is found in Boxing, which is good because this game was out in 2001, and a 2001 PlayStation game without memory card support would be stupid. So I say this is a simple game because control boils down to going left and right, pressing square to punch, and X to block. And that's it. All those other buttons on this fangled PlayStation controller, pre-DualShock or otherwise, well, save for the start button, that pauses the game of course, but all those other buttons see no use whatsoever. Instead you punch with square, and holding the D-pad in different directions will net you different moves. You have a stamina meter above, and if you manage to drain your opponent of all his or her stamina, the orange part that is, you win the match. The match can also end after 3 KOs in a round, or via decision after a number of rounds have passed. In between rounds, you can restore some health, which is important. So boxing is really simple to the point of it being a glorified button masher. There's some depth to the gameplay, each boxer possessing certain moves and skills and such, but it's really not that big of a deal, as you could just mash buttons while occasionally dodging and blocking blows in order to avoid getting hit. Now naturally, as you progress to the top leagues and attempt to unlock the last few fighters, the competition does get fierce, and this is where you need to hone some skills to win. But regardless, it's a simple and straightforward little game that only uses 2 buttons at most, so learning the controls shouldn't be too much of an issue. Shallow, perhaps, but for what it does well enough, and it has its moments. As stated before, Boxing sports some super deformed, chibified boxing characters that look fairly similar to each other, save for hair, facials, and minor details here and there, such as outfits and such. It's a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, as the faces will change to comical expressions when in duress, and even in victory in some cases. The fact that you have unique facial animations and or textures is something to be admired for a budget title. The game as a whole looks fairly decent for the most part. The ring looks fine, the camera perspective is always locked to a 2.5D fighting game angle, and it serves the game fine, though it does shift when you sidestep and such. I feel, as a whole, graphically it looks fine. Sound-wise, not much to say there either. There's some stock generic-sounding Japanese rock-sounding music in the background that feels like it fits with every generic PlayStation title out there. As individual compositions to fill a void, their presence is surprisingly largely hardly felt. That's a mouthful. You hardly notice the music as the sound effects overwhelm the music. And the music's fairly wallpapery music stuff. Not very memorable. And the sounds are alright too, so that's something, I guess. Not much to say there, really. Overall, Boxing is competently fun fare for a PlayStation budget title. It's simplistic, yes, but it does what it does well enough, and it's fun for a lark whether alone or with a buddy. Is it one of the better boxing titles ever made? Not really. Probably not even one of the better boxing games on PlayStation. But it's relatively harmless fare, and for a game that was dirt cheap, it ain't too bad. I was expecting worse, and I got something that was good enough, and that's all I could ever really ask for.